I see you up on the screen as well. That's just because you'll be sharing some slides. Yeah.
That's right.
All right, we are back live. We are going to spend some time now, probably right up until lunch, for. I may have to duck out at 11:30 for a few minutes, but I wanted to get an update from the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition and from the Vermont State Housing Authority on the issues that we've been talking about them. We saw some news that there was an amendment to the budget that's going to talk about some of the home, trying to provide funding for services and for purchases of housing. But it's our turn to get an update from the Vermont, from these folks, from Ann and Kathleen, on the status of where we are with our existing households who are experiencing homelessness, what's in store for them from a programmatic standpoint or financial standpoint as we're facing a couple of different deadlines for May 31st and June 30th. And then from the State Housing Authority, the VRAP program of rental subsidies is winding down, and I really wanted to get an idea of what that means and the impacts that's going to make on our policy making as we move forward between now and the end of the session, because we are facing what we're considering is an extreme crisis of action. What may be happening with Vermonters who need to exit a motel program or who may be at risk of eviction because they're losing their rental subsidies. So with that cheery introduction, I'd like to just pass the microphone to Ann Sosen. And Ann, you've been in our committee before, so you've met us. So I'll just let you go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Chair Stevens and the committee. For the record, my name is Ann Sosen. I'm the Interim Executive Director of the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition. And I'd just like to start by thanking you for all of your leadership and hard work to keep Vermonters housed as we work together to address this crisis. I'm going to put up some slides for our conversation today. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. So today I'd like to just talk about the cost of inaction on homelessness and eviction. And I want to just begin with a couple of quotes. I want to start with the words of a 55-year-old resident of an Upper Valley motel that I interviewed as part of my own research last week. She told me, and I really need to be inside because my health would just go downhill fast. Before I was lucky enough to stay here, I was in my car and my doctor said that if I didn't get inside that I was going to die. So then somehow I got into this program and I'm so thankful because I wouldn't be here if it weren't for this program. At this same motel, I also met a 20-something young person who was able to begin recovery, get access to hepatitis C treatment, and start a new job. These are just two of the many Vermonters who described the life-saving impact of stable shelter. The gains that they have made, however, are tenuous and risk being lost if they lose shelter in coming months. My objectives today are threefold. First, I want to talk briefly about the emergency of homelessness in Vermont. I'd like to lay out the cost of inaction on this emergency, and I'd like to put forward some evidence for action. After I do that, we can talk about some of the policy proposals that we have put forward as a coalition and that others are discussing. So just some high-level data on the current situation of homelessness in Vermont. As you all know, our state has the second highest per capita rate of homelessness in the United States, and Vermonters are entering homelessness right now at a rate faster than they're exiting it. 2,400 Vermonters became homeless in 2022, and 2,400 households, and then 2,400 left homelessness. More than 80% of Vermonters experiencing homelessness are sheltered in motels. So motels are providing the vast majority of shelter in our state right now. Motel program participants who were interviewed by the Agency of Human Services cited rental assistance or subsidy and support securing rental housing is the greatest housing need they faced it. And contrary to many claims that I've seen, there are only 37 motel guests are from out of state. So the vast majority of motel guests are from Vermont. This is a population that is extremely vulnerable. More than about 75% of households have an individual with a disability. 1 in 4 previously stayed in a psychiatric hospital. Nearly 1 in 4 stayed in a substance use treatment facility. More than 40% had 1 or more trips to an ER. 1 in 4 is previous, and we have strong evidence that all of these groups of Vermonters can be housed, and I'll speak about that briefly later. We're also seeing colliding crises, and I know that Kathleen is going to speak shortly about the crisis of eviction. I want to just highlight a couple of data points. As you know, we have currently the lowest rental vacancy rates in the US and record housing costs. Evictions are on the rise. Data from Legal Aid shows growing numbers of evictions, and they're estimating that evictions are set to surpass 1,800 in 2023 compared to 1,350 in 2022. Let's talk just for a few minutes about the cost of inaction. And I really want to highlight that eliminating homelessness funding does not eliminate its impacts or costs. I think there's often a myth that we can just cut funding and then we cut the costs that we're incurring as a state or as communities. And that's not what's borne out by the evidence or experience from other settings. What we see instead is that when we cut funding for homelessness and homelessness funding streams, we're simply displacing those costs and impacts to other places and to other budgets. We see that the costs of unsheltered homelessness fall on municipalities, on health systems, on criminal justice systems, on our schools, and on our public services. We know that housing is health. We have an enormous body of literature linking homelessness and housing instability to adverse health impacts across the lifespan. We see that prenatal and postnatal homelessness is associated with adverse health outcomes. Children who have experienced homelessness are far more likely to experience serious health conditions and to become more vulnerable to abuse and violence. Youth are experiencing homelessness are at elevated risk for poor physical, mental health outcomes. They face barriers to care, and they're much more likely to engage in high-risk behaviors and experience violence. Homelessness is associated with a broad range of poor health outcomes in adults, and we see a large and growing mortality gap for people who are experiencing homelessness. So I really want to underscore that all people experiencing homelessness are incredibly vulnerable. Here, we see a study on mortality and people with injection drug use, and we see that stable housing is independently associated with lower all-cause mortality among people who inject drugs. And I just want to remind you that the backdrop for this conversation on housing right now is a large and growing overdose crisis. Last year, we saw for the third time record overdose crises in the state, and housing is an important part of our policy solutions in response to this crisis. So let me share with you the experience of Massachusetts following a policy change to eligibility for emergency shelter. And what Massachusetts saw is that even though there was only a modest increase in children experiencing homelessness, homelessness increased about 1.4 times. Visits for child homelessness increased 13-fold during the same period. So we see increased burden, increased burden on our healthcare system and other services when we see increases in unsheltered homelessness. And this is borne out in study after study. I'm just highlighting a few studies that really illustrate the very wide-ranging impacts that unsheltered homelessness has. We also know that eviction contributes to poor health outcomes. We have a very large body of literature linking eviction to poor health outcomes, including in children. And I know that Kathleen's going to talk more about the data from our state right now, but I really want to flag that we're not simply talking about unsheltered homelessness, we're talking about housing instability and across a continuum. The costs of homelessness, though, are not, we also see significant financial costs of homelessness. Several studies and reports estimate the cost of unsheltered homelessness at upwards of $30,000 per year. Some put that number significantly higher. And these costs are absorbed by healthcare systems, criminal justice systems, public services, health systems, and communities. We have a lot of data on the homelessness jail cycle. People who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness are more likely to interact with the criminal justice system and emergency services and people in shelters. And one randomized control trial out of Denver estimated this cost at about $4,000 per person for 90 days. And again, there are many estimates out there. This is just one, but all point in the same direction, that this is significant costs. Unsheltered homelessness is also resource intensive for our communities, and most of these costs are absorbed not by homelessness funding streams, but by municipalities. This HUD study estimated that about 90% of costs associated with cleaning or maintaining encampments or responding to encampments were absorbed by local municipalities. Many of you saw this story in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, and this also highlights many of the impacts on our private businesses and on our communities. Again, we can choose to manage homelessness with evidence-based solutions, or we can let it manage us. That's our choice as a state, but we should recognize the wide-ranging impacts if we don't take action. I also want to just briefly highlight the invisible costs of unsheltered homelessness. Out of sight does not mean out of danger. And a Northeast Kingdom healthcare provider really brought that into focus in this quote, which I'll share with you today. She said, "So if a client doesn't have a place to sleep that night, but she can choose to go to a shelter or maybe stay with a guy that she knows she's going to have sex with in order to have a place to stay," things like that. So we'll see that pretty consistently. And then over time, we'll see that they're just staying there and that they're starting to use and things like that. So it's just like this path that happens because housing is an issue that's like the root cause. But this is a solvable crisis, and we have evidence for action. And that's what I really want to focus on in this next section. So first and foremost, I want to highlight that we have strong evidence that homelessness is a housing problem. Colburn and Aldern in their research have demonstrated that housing affordability and supply, not substance use, mental illness, poverty, climate change, local political context, availability of services, accounts for the regional variation we see in homelessness. So the individual factors can help to influence who becomes homeless, but don't explain the regional variations or the scale of homelessness that we see across the US. And I hear again and again across the state from service providers that homelessness is more of a housing problem than it is anything else. And this quote from a separate Northeast Kingdom service provider attests to that as well. We have really, really strong evidence that the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness can be housed. We have robust evidence from randomized control trials, which are considered the gold standard of evidence, observational studies, large-scale evaluations, that the vast majority of people experiencing homelessness, including those with frequent healthcare utilization, frequent interactions with the criminal justice system, severe mental illness, can be successfully housed using a housing first model. And I can talk a little bit more about what we mean when we say that. I want to just flag two really large randomized control trials that provide just such strong evidence of how positive these outcomes can be when we bring really robust evidence-based models to scale. So the Denver Social Impact Bound was a large randomized control trial in Denver, and 79% of participants with chronic homelessness were successfully housed. 86% were successfully housed after 1 year and 77% after 3 years. And this was with a population experiencing chronic homelessness. So this is not all people experiencing homelessness or reflective of everyone in our state. Project Welcome Home, a separate randomized control trial was done in San Francisco, and 86% of individuals with significant medical conditions, healthcare utilization, and encounters with the criminal justice system were successfully housed and remain housed after 1 year. So how does this work in the real world? When these approaches are brought to scale, we see really dramatic progress. So it's not just something that's done in a research environment. We see Houston making really fast progress. Milwaukee similarly has brought Housing First to scale and is making very large steps towards addressing its crisis. Similarly, the Veterans Administration has registered significant decreases in veterans experiencing homelessness since implementing a Housing First model. I want to just highlight as well some of the other lessons that are emerging from other states that help us to understand that we don't need to choose between the full scale implementation of these models and unsheltered homelessness for large numbers of people in our states. There are states that are putting forward really innovative models to address the situation that we find ourselves in at this moment. California's Project Roomkey and Homekey was able to transition from their pandemic hotel program to a permanent housing strategy and create a very large number of units in a very short period of time. Similarly, Oregon's Project Turnkey is a statewide host to housing initiative. Their legislature invested about $71.7 million in rapid conversion of hotels to housing, and they were able to bring an enormous amount of capacity online in a very short period of time. And I'd really encourage everyone to think about the types of policy innovation we might deploy as we make headway on this crisis. We all know that motels are not the solution to homelessness. Permanent housing is, and I really thank you for your leadership in supporting really strong investments. But at the same time, we need creative solutions that are informed by the lessons of other states and reflect the best evidence we have to create bridges into housing and not cliffs into homelessness. So in conclusion, just a few points, and then we can discuss some of the policy ideas we have or questions that you have. I want to emphasize again that homelessness is a housing problem and a policy choice. Eliminating homelessness funding does not eliminate the cost of homelessness. We have strong evidence for interventions to address homelessness. And most people, including the chronically unhoused with severe mental illness, can be housed with very positive retention rates, health outcomes, and cost benefits. Let me stop there and bring down my slides, and then I can answer questions you have about them or some of the policy proposals we've put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Can you just get into the policy proposals that you have? Again, we have some ideas of, obviously we've heard throughout the session, but I know that a lot of this conversation has been over in Human Services as well, and less so in this committee. If you could just give us a review of the policy positions that VAHC is taking right now, that would be great.
Sure. So our coalition, working with other partners across the state, has put forward the Bridges to Housing proposal. In this proposal, we lay out 5 basic strategies for both decreasing reliance on our motel-based shelter, but also accelerating progress on homelessness. And we've continued to refine some of our ideas over time, but let me just highlight at high level a couple of the strategies that we think are really important. The first is that we need to invest in alternatives to motel-based shelter. We need to expand emergency housing capacity, and we're looking at some very innovative strategies for doing this at costs that might even be lower than what we have put forward. Second, we need to maintain shelter as we move forward. 2,800 people are currently sheltered or residing in motels, and we need to use this as a bridge to get us to the next solution. As part of this strategy, we also call for the types of investments that you've recommended in permanent affordable housing. And so I want to thank you for coming forward with such strong recommendations. Finally, we also call for statewide action or an updating of our plan. The 2017 roadmap is a good way forward. We're looking to see that updated, as well as to see a statewide strategy that's backed up by structures to coordinate our response. And so I can answer questions or drill into parts of that that might be of interest to this committee.
Representative Elder.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. In your Bridges to Housing proposal, there was one element that did talk about rapidly building new housing, and I think the numbers were around $40 million, and over the next 2 years, a projection of maybe being able to add an additional 60 beds, I believe, in shelter situations, and then an additional 60 efficiency units. And that was, and you'd said maybe prices could even be lower, but that was about $40 million in the February 8th report. I'm just curious, there's that plan, and I assume you're still in favor of that plan. As you probably know, we have an amendment today that we're looking at to the budget that would put $10 million towards purchasing vacant mobile homes, and that would be in theory, 250 homes, which of course could be 2 to 3 bedrooms potentially, for $10 million. And I'm just kind of wondering, does that strike you as a good investment that we are going to be considering on an amendment to 494 today? Because it feels like it's related to that portion of your recommendation.
Yeah, I think employing a range of strategies makes a lot of sense. And, our thought was not to put forward a one size fits all idea. And so we're really open to different strategies, including the use of manufactured homes. We also have really been looking at the work that's being done in other places and think that some of those, we need more exploration of how, of whether we can do motel conversions faster and for significantly less than we initially estimated.
And one of the troubling things about our current situation is that, to me personally, is that we're asking to return to a pre-pandemic mindset of a certain Darwinism that existed, where we didn't have enough funding and we expected people to be able to find a couch to sleep on, et cetera. It is a very difficult way of looking at the problem. But while we are in the process of building units, which may or may not be enough, what we've seen or heard from other organizations is that, yes, we've had X number of people exit homelessness, but more people entering it. And we know that there's a certain percentage of people who are chronically homeless, but there's also people who are in a short term and need cash more than they need services. And then there's some folks who need cash and services, and there's some folks who need primarily services in order to make housing sustainable. But I always, on one hand, I'm always going to apply a certain amount of appreciative inquiry to the fact that we've housed as many people as we have. But the flip side of that coin is, but yet here we are with more people. I would think that we as an institution, as the system, can say, we haven't solved this. And I'm just curious, how do we move forward with this notion that homelessness and folks, families, households experiencing homelessness is not a static thing? And, where are these folks who are, we thought, again, we were able to house over, 3,000 people or households. And yet, again, here we are how did we stay here essentially? How did this happen? In perhaps in your analysis?
So I guess just to start with your initial comment, I think we're all looking for a pre-pandemic normal that we're not going to find. The housing landscape has changed in our state, and in many ways, the housing crisis has continued to grow during the pandemic. The crisis of homelessness has continued to grow, but we also have new opportunities in front of us. And I don't want us to kind of lose sight of the creative solutions that we've been able to deploy at this, as a state, the successes that we have seen over the last couple of years. We really need to be bringing some of those models to scale right now. And thinking about solutions, I've spoken mostly about homelessness interventions or approaches that we can employ, but we need to be looking at the full range of policy levers to prevent eviction and homelessness. And so I don't mean to ignore that is a really important piece of the puzzle. And I appreciate the thinking that you're doing around that. But we're going to need large investments if we're going to make progress on this crisis. We need to really think about how do we bring those interventions to scale? How do we have a response that's really commensurate with the scale of the problem right now?
But if we were to magically put 2,000 units scattered around in the right places in the state, and everybody who's currently homeless would have a place to stay with support services. That's a serious chunk of crisis of the instant money. But in 6 months, I feel like we'd still see more people homeless. And I'm just curious, like what do you have in your briefcase to help us think about what the longer term things besides just the investment in making housing? I guess I'm stipulating that yes, that is the most important thing. But what are the other things that we have to, as a legislature, as a culture, address in order to see a real reduction?
Yeah. So I want to say that if we were able to house another 2,000 people or preserve, emergency shelter housing options, that would be an enormous success. And I don't want to diminish that, but we really do need to pair those types of interventions with other policy solutions to prevent eviction. I know that there is a proposal for a rent relief fund that would, while I don't, I'm not intimately familiar with that particular proposal. Things like that would go a very long way in preventing eviction. So I'll defer to partners who have much more expertise on that front, but we're not thinking about magic bullets. We're thinking about putting the right set of evidence-based solutions together to address this crisis.
Representative Burrows.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. I have a question. I keep hearing over and over again that 75% of our currently unhoused population have disabilities. And so I have a couple of questions related to that. One is, to what degree has that changed in the last 3 years? Has 75% been consistent, over time, or is that a new facet to this problem?
So I can respond that I don't have longitudinal data. The AHS data is from this year, so I can't tell you how that number has shifted over the last couple of years. But I would hope that AHS would be able to provide that information.
Thank you. And I just simply wish to voice a concern, which is that we keep hearing this statistic, and then when we discuss solutions for our most immediate and long-term solutions, it drops right out of the conversation. And it's 75% of people. It's a large number. It's not, so that concerns me. That's it.
Okay. And thank you so much right now for your testimony. If you could make sure to email your slideshow or your slide deck to us, I would appreciate that so that we could post that online. And if you're able to just be present during this next presentation, that would be helpful too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's move right on to Kathleen Burke from VSHA.
Good morning, everyone. See if I can make this all happen efficiently and without error.
Like you had like two devices with you.
Just like you.
Is that a cough?
Yeah.
And Kathleen, you've been with us already this year, so you know us. As I said at the beginning of the hearing, we have, because we've been working on other things, we've been following just obliquely what's been happening in the human services, in the conversations with that they've been having with services and with housing issues related to what's going to happen in May and June. And I've been privy to a couple of emails of facts that you've shared with other representatives, and I just wanted you to have the opportunity to share those facts, as difficult as they're going to be to hear, for us. When last we met, you had some idea of how many people were in the program, in the rental subsidy program. But I just wanted to give you the time to discuss not just what's happening with the individuals in the subsidy program, but what the loss of VRAP funds will mean for everybody who's been receiving them, including people who needed first last security, perhaps landlords who have been accessing funds to as sort of a backstop against any damages that may have happened. What the status of a rental, I don't know if you're involved with the rental relief fund conversations.
We are very much involved.
I imagined you would be, and also to remind us about the voucher programs and the difficulties of actually being in a place where we can say, look, we have vouchers without, we've heard testimony about the difficulty of, if I came up on the list and got a voucher, I only had X number of days to find an apartment with a landlord who would accept those things. So I'm asking for probably 4 hours of information in 45 minutes. So thank you.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Kathleen Burke. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont State Housing Authority. And Chair Stevens, I think I put together a very informative slide deck for the committee today that will address all of those concerns. Challenge right now will be to locate it. Bear with me. Don't have it open.
And then it should show up here.
Okay. Yes.
So now you're going to want to Zoom.
Thank you for your coaching.
And then hit
Share.
share. Over here somewhere. And then it's right there. Of course. And then you don't get it.
Perfect. Okay. So again, to start my presentation.
This is also available on our website if you'd like.
It absolutely
folks
is.
would like to,
It absolutely is. So the topics covered today will include Section 8 rental assistance, the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program, new initiatives that we've launched just in the last couple of months, and then recommendations for this committee. I'm going to begin by talking about the Section 8 waiting list. This is the waiting list for the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. In conjunction with rule changes announced by the Agency of Administration affecting eligibility to the Vermont Emergency Rental Assistance Program, VSHA opened the waiting list to the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program on October 1st, 2022, and later closed the waiting list on January 23rd, 2023. During this almost 3-month period, approximately 5,291 households submitted applications for rental assistance. Also touching on the success rates of families with a housing choice voucher finding a unit. In February 2022, our program participants had a success rate of 70%. In February 2023, the success rate was 22%. In a 1-year period of time, that's a 48% decline in voucher success. And what that means for those who aren't familiar with the lingo is that if we issue 100 vouchers to the waiting list, 22 households are successful. The remaining are unsuccessful, and they are in a position of giving up their voucher, and that gets returned to the housing agency and reissued to the waiting list.
And so, yeah, if we can take, again, just to turn off the highway here for a second, I just want to reiterate that the choice vouchers that you're talking about, one of many voucher programs that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Does VSHA run most of those vouchers programs for the state, or do some of them are run through DCF and OEO, and they provide, just for our purposes, they provide what percent of rental assistance to any given recipient?
So the Vermont State Housing Authority offers the federally funded Housing Choice Voucher Program, referred to as Section 8, which most folks commonly know it as. In addition, local housing authorities like the Montpelier Housing Authority, like the Burlington Housing Authority, for example, also administer Section 8 rental assistance programs in their jurisdiction. Our agency operates throughout the state alongside of local PHAs. We are the largest Section 8 administrator in the state. The local housing authorities, aside from Burlington, which has a large program, typically has a portfolio of maybe 100 vouchers or less. In terms of state-funded assistance, there's the rental assistance offered by the Office of Economic Opportunity. There's also rental assistance funded through the Department of Mental Health, our Housing Subsidy Plus Care program. These are all state-funded initiatives. My assumption, based on our data, we serve over 4,000 families in the state of Vermont with Section 8 rental assistance, is that the success rate in those programs are going to be on par with what we have seen in the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. Did I answer your questions, Chair Stevens?
I'm sorry, one quick clarification that you said 4,000 families served. Is that by you or by the housing authorities?
That is the Vermont State Housing Authority's portfolio.
Oh, I've got a question.
Yeah.
So when you say that the February 22 success rate, that is, and just to clarify, that's for the Housing Choice Voucher Program?
That's
or
for the-
general Section 8?
For the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. So this is a program by which families are selected from our waiting list, they're provided a voucher, and they search for housing in the rental market.
Okay.
So this statistic,
And so what's the other kind of Section 8 housing? Do they have
we're going to get to that
Okay.
later on in the
Okay.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Household assisted with Section 8 rental assistance by the Vermont State Housing Authority. So this is just our portfolio alone. The Housing Choice and Project-Based Voucher Program, we're assisting 4,158 households. In addition, in our Project-Based Rental Assistance Program, we're assisting an additional 3,262 households for a total of 7,420 households. This is industry lingo, and unless you're in the trenches, you're not going to understand the distinction. But the difference between project-based rental assistance and housing choice project-based rental assistance is two different funding streams from HUD. One is the Office of Public Housing, one is the Office of Multifamily Housing. The project-based rental assistance program is administered through the Office of Multifamily Housing, and those rental assistance subsidies are tied to a building. And the families don't have the option of moving from their assisted unit with continued assistance. If they leave that unit, they leave their rental assistance behind. And the Housing Choice and Project-Based Voucher initiatives, the rental assistance follows the family. Average housing assistance payment. Again, this is reflective of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. February 2022, our average housing assistance payment, this is the aggregate across the state, was $697 per month. In February 2023, that's $753 a month. That's an increase of approximately 9.2%. So that statistic is going to take in the average of 14 different fair market rent areas across the state. So Northeast Kingdom combined with Chittenden County. So it's an average. Obviously, the average housing assistance payments for individual counties will be reflective of the individual areas and much higher in the Chittenden County area. Now we're going to talk about ERA and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Again, to remind folks, funded through the Federal Consolidation Appropriations Act in December 2020 and ARPA March of 2021, a total of $352 million in funding was allocated to Vermont. Vermont ERAP, which we call VRAP, is administered by the Vermont State Housing Authority under the terms of a grant agreement with the Agency of Administration. VRAP initiatives. The first initiative was rent arrearage and rental assistance for up to 18 months combined. Housing stabilization, providing Afghan refugees with stable housing on the campus, the SIT campus in Brattleboro, providing health and safety repairs to keep households stably housed, including essential maintenance practices. Health and safety repairs to bring a unit online for a new household. Security deposits, moving expenses to assist a family in a new unit. Also, eviction prevention initiatives, payment of rent into court, stipulations to dismiss. These have all been initiatives of VRAP. VRAP, as you know, will sunset on June 30th. Active participants eligible for assistance through June 30th, 2023 is 3,356 households. Of these households, 1,649 will be rent burdened, and we're defining rent burden as a family who would be paying more than 40% of their income toward the rent. Again, I want to remind this committee that currently the folks that are receiving a VRAP to date have an income of 30% of area median income or below. So just to go over the statistics and the breakdown, 826 households will pay more than 100%. of their household income toward rent. 216 will pay between 76 to 100% of their household income toward rent. 347 will pay between 51% and 75% of their household income toward rent. 118 will pay between 41 and 50% of their household income toward rent. And 142 will pay between 30 and 40% of their household income toward rent.
And you know this because of this is the information on their application forms and just keeping track of who they are and where they are.
We know this because of the vast data that we have regarding VRAP participants. And we know this because we've been doing ongoing analysis of the needs of participants, including, our largest concern right now, those that continue to receive benefits right now.
And so about half of them will be rent burden according to these numbers here. Tell me about the other half. Is that
Again, based on our analysis, the other half, if you will, we believe will be able to afford their rent based on the assumption that where they're living, what the gross rent on their rental unit is, and what their income is. And so they would be paying 30% of their income toward the rent. These folks that we're reviewing today would be paying more than that amount. Of most concern, I believe, are the folks that are paying more than 50% of their income toward rent. And so to see this a little differently, this is the rent burden by county. And so you can begin to see which counties are going to be most impacted by this. Chittenden County is at 23.5%. We've got Rutland County at 13.16%, and so on.
Okay, I'm gonna just do a short pause here.
Okay.
Folks have to go. A couple of folks have to go, so I just wanna continue the testimony. I just heard for the folks who are leaving, is it okay that we'll continue this? I mean, this isn't a real discussion. This is just getting information from Kathleen. You can watch it later.
Yeah, I'll watch it on YouTube.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Stop sharing.
You're the best. You've been leaned on a lot, I'm sure.
I'm sorry, again, for clarification on the slide, that percentage is the percentage of VRAP participants in that county. Is that right?
So again, this is the rent burden statistic. The 1,649 households that we've determined will be rent burdened at the conclusion of VRAP. And this is how it's reflected on a county-based level. So again, the total number is 1,649. You will see in Bennington, for example, of the 1,649, 126 households live in Bennington County.
So I think given, again, this is just for the people who are participating in this program,
Currently.
which is not everyone in the world, not everyone in our state, but this is the people who have been helped, who have come forward to be helped by this program over the last 3 years.
Well, this data that we're sharing today is reflective of those families that remain in the program to date.
That remain in the program.
That remain in the program to date. And again, the Agency of Administration announced changes to VRAP in October. And since then, we've been slowly reducing benefits to program participants and also redefining eligibility for who can receive benefits. Today, as we're getting ready for the program to sunset at the end of June, those households remaining are those that we've deemed to be the most vulnerable. These are households at 30% of area median income and below.
So we can go again to get a full understanding of and a full appreciation of the risks or the burdens that these folks are carrying. We still have to look back historically into your data to see how many people had been benefiting from this program through the pandemic up until the time that the rules were changing.
Mm-hmm. I said it. And to that point, I've said that, the administration of VRAP for us has been a real life case study. We have so much knowledge that we didn't have before of the needs of Vermonters, specifically around housing. And we have lots of data available to us. And so certainly that can be shared.
But this is again, going back to the October decision. These were the people determined to be most at risk and most burdened.
That's right.
Okay, and that's what's left. And you're gonna tell us what's gonna change in May, and let me just let you go.
Okay.
Please do what we asked you to do. Please.
Moving on. So I guess before I go on to new initiatives to that point, Chair Stevens, beginning in May, this very same group of folks, the folks that are remaining in VRAP, will see their benefit reduced to 50% of request. So again, when VRAP first started and before October, quite frankly, participants could request 100% of their rent and benefit. On October, we implemented the step-down policy, and since then, we've been reducing benefits to households, trying to get families prepared to paying rent, right? On May 1st, this same group that's remaining in VRAP will see their benefits reduced to 50% of contract rent. So moving on to new initiatives. In January 2023, we launched the Landlord Relief Program, which is a risk pool program available to landlords. And we also, in February 2023, launched the Manufactured Home Improvement and Repair Program. Again, the Landlord Relief Program is a type of risk mitigation funding. Risk mitigation funds are a type of insurance for landlords that participate in a subsidized housing program. Housing choice vouchers and supportive housing programs are specific types of subsidized housing programs that use these funds. Risk mitigation funds can provide for lost rent, damage to a unit beyond normal wear and tear, repairs to meet housing quality standards, and in some cases, legal fees for landlords. Vermont's risk pool, the Landlord Relief Program, is made possible by an allocation of $5 million in general funds to the Agency of Human Services, Office of Economic Opportunity, granted to the Vermont State Housing Authority. And these were general funds appropriated last year. The goals of the Landlord Relief Program is to open doors for landlords and tenants, to establish successful trusting relationships that result in successful tenancies and housing stability. Increase the inventory of rental units available to Vermonters who are experiencing or are at risk of experiencing homelessness. Provide resources to prevent lost housing opportunities for tenants, prevent vacancies for landlords. Now, the Landlord Relief Program will provide landlords may file several claims throughout the tenancy for damages, but the total award for all claims may not exceed $5,000 for a single tenancy, $10,000 per apartment, and each claim must be at least $500. These are the caps that have been established through policy.
And are those documented damages that made by the tenants, or would it be water that came down from another unit?
It could be either, and I'll just pause for a moment. My colleague Tyler Moss is with me, and he's the director of the Landlord Relief Program.
We're primarily dealing with the tenant damages for tenants that are in an existing unit, but if it was to bring a unit up to housing quality standards to then have a subsidized tenant with a housing choice voucher move into that unit, then it could go beyond a tenant damage, be something maybe to update the GFI outlets in the bathroom or something like that to bring it up to housing quality standards so that the unit would be rentable.
Which would be something less than what the VHIP program does. The VHIP program generally is for larger expenditures.
We don't administer, so I won't talk too much about the details of VHIP, but there is a requirement in VHIP that the unit is empty for 90 days before they can do anything. So this is to prevent that. We also allow for vacancy loss claims from landlord if a unit is damaged or is just being held for a subsidized tenant to move in, then they can get a vacancy loss claim for up to 2 months to hold that unit for them, because a lot of times that was sort of we want to rent, we have to do $1,000 worth of work to get this subsidized tenant in there. Maybe I'll just rent it to this other person. We say, hey, we'll pay for the rent while you're making those repairs, and we'll pay for the repairs.
So that's that $5,000. I mean, it's like the $5,000 limit per tenancy.
For
And that would
tenancy.
be
Great.
the
So-
unification of a unit and a tenant. However, it's up to $10,000 for the unit itself. So if a tenant moved out, there would that unit would have another $5,000 left over in it to work with another tenancy. It could go to multiple tenancies if they didn't reach that $10,000 cap. It would be 2,005 times.
And we can get more into the weeds of this when this committee is really ready. It's a brand new initiative, again, launched at the end of January. Chair Stevens, to your point, we're being very intentional to not to work with VHIP and not cover an expense that VHIP would cover, and vice versa. We're very cognizant of the different pots of money, and we really want to use those funds wisely.
And when you talk about working with the folks who are doing VHIP, the VHIP money is distributed to in Central Vermont to Down Street or to CHT. I mean, that money is distributed on an equal basis to the 5 neighbor works organizations,
That's right.
and then they work with perhaps the same landlords that you've worked. I mean, you're reaching out to. You're not reaching out to the state. You're reaching out to the housing agencies.
Well, it's mostly working with DHCD and to understand precisely what VHIP will pay for and what they will not pay for. So we're not duplicating or paying a benefit that VHIP may pay, and vice versa.
And again, this was a general fund thing that we instituted last year, and I think there's a proposal to continue it or to re-up some of that money. I'm not sure where it is, and I'm sure we'll learn a little
Right.
bit.
It's certainly an initiative that I fully recommend continue to be supported by this committee and the General Assembly. And we'll go on and we'll begin. So we'll see. This is in just a little over 2 months. We officially launched at the end of January. You'll see that we've already paid out a little over $51,000 in benefits to landlords.
How do you get word out to landlords that this is available?
We have a newsletter that we send out through Constant Contact. We're doing community-based trainings regularly. Tyler, do you want to speak on the marketing initiatives that we've done today?
So because we've done so many, we're known for rental assistance, right? So we have the contacts of a lot of landlords, especially through ERAP. We have over 4,000 landlords that were in that system, so we were able to reach out to them to their emails directly, because that's how they signed up for the program. So we don't work with through another agency to administer the funds. We go directly to the landlords. We hold informational meetings. Large scale, 200 plus landlords and community service providers, just around the state have attended each single
So just
session.
for clarification, so you only work with landlords who were involved with VRAP?
No,
Oh.
that's how the marketing, I was speaking specifically to the marketing
Okay.
effort, that's how we were able to reach out to so many landlords directly. We also work through, the local service providers so that if there is an issue, if a tenant has come and said, hey, I broke a door accidentally or whatever, or something happened, then I need, and that I have to pay for that. And if I pay for that, it's coming off my rent, right? Because it's the oldest debt that gets paid, and then so the service provider say, hey, I'll reach out to your landlord about this relief program that's available to them so that they can fix the door and maintain the tenants.
So to answer your question more directly, we have a very large landlord mailing list because of the nature of our work, because we've been privileged with administering VRAP for the past couple of years, touching over 17,000 unique tenant households. We also administer very large rental assistance programs. Here in Vermont, those rental assistance programs are a mission work. And so we have very large landlord mailing lists that we reach out to and provide information regularly. We also, just by the very nature of our work, day in and day out, work very closely with local social service organizations, CAP agencies, the Veterans Administration, and so on and so forth. So, and it's through those relationships and through our mailing lists and that we're able to convey and share information.
Thank you.
Welcome.
We've heard that there are 80,000 rental units in the state. And those are units, not landlords. Do you have a number for how many landlords and what percentage you've been able to reach out to?
I don't have that number offhand. I can certainly get you that number. Tyler, do you have a sense of what the number is?
It's 4,000 plus
Yeah.
Landlords.
That they
we've worked with, right? Yeah, I'm not saying the number,
Right.
Yeah.
But whether that's unique to VRAP.
There's a
And
lot.
so I
I was
can,
wondering if you had a number you
How many landlords there are?
it's a big number, but we certainly can report back. Okay, and moving on to the mobile home improvement and repair program. So as we all know and agree, mobile homes are an important source of affordable housing for over 7,000 Vermont households. Many mobile home parks and residents have been adversely impacted by COVID-19 pandemic. The mobile home improvement repair program offers assistance to income eligible mobile home parks and current and prospective mobile home owners. The Mobile Home Improvement and Replacement Program has been set up to support manufactured home parks, which are an important source of affordable housing in Vermont. This program offers grants and financial assistance to manufactured homeowners, prospective homeowners, and park owners to assist with the recovery from the impact of COVID-19. VSHA administers this program in collaboration with the Department of Housing and Community Development and the Central Vermont Office of Economic Opportunity, with a $4 million grant of state fiscal recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan.
7,000 homes are homes and parks, or is that the total?
That's
Go ahead.
parks.
Yes, that's in parks.
Sorry.
Yes, and these are parks that are registered with the state of Vermont. The goals of the program are to infill vacant and abandoned lots. In many of these mobile home parks, there are vacant pads. Repair existing manufactured homes and provide new foundations for the placement of manufactured homes. The projects will serve current and prospective manufactured homeowners and registered manufactured home park owners.
So the amendment that's on the floor in the budget today from Representative Wood from Human Services addresses at least the infill of the vacant or abandoned lots, part of the what they identified or what they got data from is that there are roughly at least 400 vacant pads across the state, and the $10 million that they're asking for would ideally be to purchase new homes for those abandoned lots.
I just learned of that this morning.
What do we know whether those 400 odd vacant pads are out of the flood zone?
I don't have that information, but we would certainly ask. I would ask offline anyway to start with somebody from the committee.
Okay, thank you.
They must have had data that they, whether they asked that question or not, I don't know.
Moving on. The desired outcome is to prepare 125 to 300 vacant or abandoned lots for new manufactured homes, to maintain the habitability of 250 to 400 manufactured homes, and install 25 to 75 new foundations. We will measure the program's impacts against these numbers, plus look at the total number of parks, residents, and new homeowners served by the program. And this is where we're at to date. Again, this program launched mid-February. We're just now winding down March, and we've expensed a little over $36,000, and we have $47,000 in payments scheduled to go out.
You've already had was that 106, over 167, is that 100? I'm sorry.
167 applications. So 167 applications received to the program today.
Just in the last 2 months.
That's right.
Thank you.
Recommendation. Fund an eviction rescue program. Why an eviction rescue program? With inflation on the rise, rapidly depleting federal stimulus funds, and thousands of Vermonters still unable to pay their rent, preventing eviction and supporting long-term housing stability are urgent state imperatives. Among many other repercussions for families, eviction results in long-term financial instability and limited access to affordable housing, while also causing physiological strain, depression, physical health problems, and child poverty. Rent assistance can prevent costly eviction before it gets to court. The average grant of rent arrears by the Rental Housing Stabilization Program, this was the pandemic rental assistance initiative that preceded VRAP. The average grant of rent arrears by the Rental Housing Stabilization Program was $1,900. For VRAP, it was $1,700. While VRAP was running, 400 fewer eviction cases were filed in court. Creating a program that can quickly process requests for payment of rent arrears and stipulations to dismiss evictions for non-payment of rent would save time and money, keep the court open for more urgent matters, and keep people safely housed. The existing landlord relief program is incentivizing landlords to rent to people with subsidy. In less than 2 months, the program has paid out over $51,000 to landlords. This is a critical resource for leveraging state and federal rental housing resources, providing housing to Vermont's most vulnerable. I urge this committee and the General Assembly to create an eviction rescue program to prevent non-payment of rent by making funds available for rent arrears, where such funds would preserve the tenancy and keep Vermonters stably housed. Thank you. Questions?
We used to use the phrase upstream. Is that what we're talking about with this seems to be like just upstream. a program like this. Would you agree, or would you?
What do you mean by upstream?
We used to use the phrase in the before times about the idea that upstream prevention of, rather than allowing something to get into the system. Even with the programs we have, the landlord tenant mediation programs, but this would be identifying that there is a problem or may be a problem before those decisions get made.
It's absolutely upstream. It's all about prevention, which is critical right now. I mean, we're in the midst of a housing crisis. We don't have enough housing and it's very expensive. And those that are most impacted by those variables are Vermont's lower income families. We need to do all that we can do to keep folks who are housed stably housed. If we don't, they will exit housing into homelessness.
Do you, as described the eviction rescue program, is that similar? I mean, I know it's a concept, not a program. But is it similar to an eviction diversion program, which has a mechanism for dispute resolution, or this just be a funding?
This is an eviction. It's a rent rescue fund in essence, and we have experience administering an initiative like this in VRAP, where we were able to pay rent into court to prevent an eviction, where we were able to pay stipulations to dismiss in order to prevent an eviction. The idea is that it would be a pool of money to prevent eviction for non-payment of rent. Eviction diversion is something different. And my good friend Jean Murray from Vermont Legal Aid is here also, and she can certainly speak more articulately to the differences around those two initiatives.
If you can do it in 4 minutes or less, that would be great. Because we'll be returning to eviction diversion as a committee soon, so.
So one way of thinking about it is a rent rescue fund could be one of the benefits and services available within an eviction diversion program. But if we had to make a choice right now, it would be make a fund available so that non-payment evictions are unnecessary. In other words, if somebody's a little bit behind and they can get caught up with an eviction rent arrears rescue fund, that will keep them stably housed. Eviction diversion is a services program that talks about maybe we can find for landlords and tenants that are having disputes and having trouble working things out, can refer them to available programs and try to work out things. And eviction diversion might apply to kinds of evictions that aren't for non-payment, that could be for no cause or for cause. Tenant behaviors have to change, or perhaps landlords thinking that they have to evict people in order to renovate. Maybe they don't have to do that. Maybe they can work something else out. So eviction diversion is a service that would help landlords and tenants figure out how to maintain housing stability, where rent rescue is simply having a fund available for people so they don't get evicted for non-payment.
And if there was an upstream, if there was a tributary that led into the stream, the eviction diversion is right there at the intersection, because it would the way it's proposed, it would be here's a notice of termination. There's X amount of time before that notice has to be filed. They have a certain amount of time. And that's where it could be, that's where that conversation could be had prior to an eviction process starting for good, and creating that circumstance. So
Yes.
And then we have this landlord tenant mediation program that's funded with our VRAP money, with ERAP money, that doesn't provide any funding for restitution or whatnot, but it is a mediation program between the landlords and the tenants that we funded with the federal funds, and that's in place for 2 years.
Yeah, if I may, the run out of the ERA money will fund the landlord tenant mediation program for another 2 years. Funds legal aid for another 2 years and we're trying to, everybody who is a defendant in court, we're trying to reach them and help them. So we have right now 2 years more funding to really focus on eviction prevention, and some additional programs from the state would, I think, really make an impact. And for people who don't know, eviction process is a two-step. The landlord sends a termination notice, and then when the termination date passes, then they can go to court. So right now, termination notices are between 30 and 60 days, and if there were eviction diversion, it would be after the termination notice is sent, but before it gets filed in court.
And we'll get all this as we're going to spend some time learning about at least the statutory timeframes of evictions versus real life. You know, when everybody says it takes this much longer, it's different than what it is in statute because of legal reasons and whatnot. So we'll get there eventually. Yeah.
Thank you. So when you talk about an eviction rescue fund, I'm figuring that's based on the VRAP model, right? So how long, like I'm thinking about the 826 people who pay more than 100% of their earnings. How long can they be supported by our state?
So the 826 households that have been identified who will be paying more than 100% of their income for rent, under our thinking in terms of a rent rescue fund, they most likely wouldn't be eligible to access that because key to eligibility is obtaining a sustainable tenancy, right? Okay. And so that household, we may look to other programs to try to stabilize that program, including a rent relief program that might provide for the rent arrearage portion to prevent eviction. But at the end of the day, to access funding, our vision is that the tenancy has to be sustainable.
Okay, thank you. That was exactly what I was asking.
We have to stop now.
Okay.
But thank you for this information. And again, if our focus in the second half of the year is to try to deal with some of these issues, this is going to be, again, we're going to learn more of the vocabulary. We're going to learn more about the voucher programs that are in place in lieu of a long-term program or rescue program for the people who are there. It's really important for us to shine a light, to join the light shining that's been happening on what's happening and what we might be able to do to mitigate it in a crisis of the instant is what I call it, which is just, we're going to have to expend certain amounts of money just because prior to developing programs and investments that may help alleviate this issue over time. But we have to react in a positive way, I think.
I agree, and I'll just say, we're doing a lot to develop new affordable housing, right? It's going to take time to do that. That's not going to happen. We're not going to satisfy the need this year. It's going to take a few years. Vermont needs to return to a healthy rental market, and I believe that once that happens, certainly other pressures will also be relieved, and I think we'll see, the homelessness issue beginning to resolve too. We don't have housing. We don't have nearly enough housing.
Yes. All right. Thank you, committee.
Welcome.
Apologies for skip